Hello, everyone. Welcome. Nice to see you all. We'll get started in just a few minutes. We'll give folks time to join. Hi, John. Nice to see you. We had a lot of signups for this event, lots of excitement. Nice to see you, Edward.
Feel free to drop in the chat if there's one word that describes how you're showing up here today.
Okay, we'll give folks another minute or so, and then we'll get started. Thanks for being here, Carla. Will you keep letting people in? Okay, thank you. Yes, can I have permission? Okay, and then we'll make you a co-host.
We good?
Okay, welcome everyone. This is the BioFi Community of Practice, and the purpose of our community of practice, I just dropped in the chat here, is to cultivate and support a global community of practitioners who are designing, capitalizing, implementing, and evolving bioregional financing facilities through peer-to-peer learning and coordination. And we are very excited today to have a very special guest, our friend, our mentor, our teacher, our co-conspirator in envisioning bioregional regenerative economies around the world, John Fullerton. And I'm going to ask John a variety of questions today, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So please keep track of your questions throughout the discussion, and we'll hopefully have about 25 minutes or so at the end here to have a broader group discussion. I'm going to give a quick intro for John, though he needs little introduction, I would say, to this group of people who are really building on his work in so many different places around the world. But John is an unconventional economist, an author, a teacher, and an impact investor. His work, I believe, has really laid the foundation for regenerative economics and regenerative finance to become the growing and evolving field that it is today that so many of us are building on. John is the founder of the Capital Institute, which offers education dedicated to the bold reimagination of economics and finance. He was previously a managing director at JP Morgan until he left Wall Street about 25 years ago. And John is also the co-founder of Grasslands LLC, a board member of the Savory Institute, and a member of the Club of Rome. And John and his wife live in coastal Stonington, Connecticut, in the Northeast Woodlands bioregion. Welcome, John. How are you today?
Hey, Samantha, I'm struggling with a little cold, so other than that, I'm fine. But hopefully, my brain will work well enough to have this conversation. So thanks for having me, and great to see so many familiar faces.
Well, thanks for dialing in, and I hope the conversation brings you some good energy, and I have a feeling your brain is going to work great.
It's we're in the depth of gray, cold, damp, awful winter, unlike you down in the Amazon. So
Yeah, we're sending you some energy from the jungle down here. Um,
good.
Yeah, so let me frame up our conversation a little bit today, John. Well, I'll offer a little bit of context about to the group about how I got to know you. So John and I met when I was working on the BioFi book. And I decided to take his intro to regenerative economics course. And I was so excited to take that course. I decided to organize a study group and like get
Oh,
together
that's right. Yeah.
a group of friends to take that
Yeah.
course. And this guy right here reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, I would like to join your study group and take that course with you. So that's a fun origin story of how
If
Tyler
I accomplish
met.
nothing else in life.
And we learned so much in the course, and it deeply informed the work that became the BioFi book and the BioFi project. And John and the broader BioFi team have been in a conversation ever since about how we land this body of regenerative economics in place. So that's really the topic for today. And for those of you that don't know, John has a new book that came out at the end of last year. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat here. Hold on one second. Oh no, I don't have it. Tyler, can you find it?
Okay.
Okay. Um, John's new book, we'll put that in the chat shortly, is called Regenerative Economics, Revolutionary Thinking for a World in Crisis. So quite a timely book, considering the world seems to be more in crisis with each passing week so far this year. And so we're going to have John share a little bit about the core concepts and the framework in his book. And then I'm going to ask him about how he sees the deepening field of regenerative economics meeting this reemerging bioregional movement, and a bioregional movement that is much more interested in economics and finance than maybe the bioregional movements that we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And lastly, we're going to get to some discussion around how the concepts and frameworks in John's book land in place. Like, what do they look like in application in bioregions with bioregional teams that are trying to create bioregional financing facilities or bioregional economic transition strategies in John's bioregion, but also in places around the world. So that's kind of the flow for today, and then we'll open up for a broader discussion. So, John, why don't we start with you sharing a little bit about your book? What is the core thesis? I love that revolutionary is in the title. Are there any particular elements of the book that you feel like are particularly revolutionary? And I know you had some visuals that maybe you thought could help kind of paint the picture as we're getting started here today.
Sure. So I guess I might just start by saying, as you said yourself, every day seems to bring more chaos, more, backward motion, and it's sort of weird to be talking about a book about regenerative economics when the world's on fire. And yet I do think the world is on fire, and it's going to do what it's going to do. And the more I've thought about this, the more I feel confident that no matter what happens with the world on fire, the pathway through it will be to align with life, to align our global political economy with how life works, because it's part of life. And so I'm not I'm not disheartened, but I'm in distress, like all of us. And I guess the thing I hold on to is that things are going to get worse before they get better, but no matter what happens, I just have this growing confidence that we humanity are going to somehow learn to align with life's principles. And I would say that the leading edge of that is this resurgence of the bioregional movement. And hopefully this work can help us see why that work is not only profound, but foundational to this emergence that needs to take place. So, in many ways, Samantha and Tyler and everyone who's doing this work, I sort of view you as there's this, someone just told me the other day, there was the economics, or sorry, the environmental minister in Brazil, Sylvia, I think something. She was with this friend of mine, and they were talking about what was going on in the world, and she drew a circle and then another circle in the middle, and then a line of ants moving from the outer circle to the inner circle. And she said to my friend, "You need to understand we're the ants that people are going to trample over to get to the middle." And so it struck me that we're all the ants moving in the right direction, even if we're not going to see the outcome that we're all working so hard to see. And I don't mean to start this with a negative comment, but I guess I think we just need to be realistic about the scale of disruption that's happening, the scale and scope of it. So I hope my book is a meaningful contribution to all of us ants who are marching toward the center, whatever the center is. And I'd say I do have a few visuals that might help communicate what I think is the essence of the book. So maybe I'll just
That'd
pull
be
those up
great.
real quick. Um, you're going to need to permission me, my friend.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay. Yeah. This is not a presentation. This is just some pictures.
Okay.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So the big idea that is remarkably not understood, it's not people are not aware of it, and economists that are aware of it don't seem to understand why it's profound. But our modern economics that we run the world on is literally built on the logic, the Newtonian logic, the reductionist logic of a machine. And you're looking at a photograph of Irving Fisher's second construction of a machine to simulate the economy. And we can talk about why that's profound in a second, but that is factually true. And yet, how often do we hear people talk about this when we talk about sustainability and whatnot? And by the way, this is still the case today. This is Ray Dalio, probably the world's most successful hedge fund manager, who's now running around teaching people how to make money and how to avoid the crisis. And he's got a little video how the economic machine works. So this is sort of like the water we're swimming in without realizing we're swimming in it.
Mhm.
Um, and here's the key. A machine is complicated, but life is complex. And those are profoundly different things. A machine is made of parts that are replaceable. Life is made of relationships that are irreplaceable if they're damaged. Um, and then there's another layer of this, which is that not all complexity is alive. Many things that are complex collapse. And so what I'm interested in and what we're all interested in is complex living systems because they have the design principles, they have the qualities that allow that life to continue. And so at a very basic level, the thesis of the book is the economy is a living system, not a machine. And our latest science understands how living systems, well, I shouldn't say it. Our latest science gives us basic understanding of how living systems work. It's way more complex than we actually can understand.
Mhm.
But it follows patterns and principles. as opposed to laws of gravity and whatnot. But it's not in conflict with the laws of gravity. And so the thesis of the book is that our economy will need to align with these same patterns and principles.
Mhm.
And if we don't do that, we continue to optimize the machine. If we continue to do what we do, which is optimize inputs in order to maximize productivity and return on capital, we end up with this. And you all understand, I'm oversimplifying this to make my point, but this is the machine we've designed, and it works pretty well as designed. And it's not as simple as this, but you get the point. And so what we need is an economic system that has embedded in it what I call now a capital cycle that is analogous to a nutrient cycle or the carbon cycle in living organisms that somehow rebalances these different, if we reduce this to forms of capital, which is an oversimplification. But this is a radical resetting of how an economy works. And the book talks about my ideas on how we could achieve that. And, all of them seem beyond, there's a famous saying, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Mhm.
And by the way, this is not a call for socialism. Socialism has most of the same drawbacks. Um, but the book is not intended to be a practical response that's politically feasible in everyone's mind. It's meant to be what's actually necessary to do if we're to have a chance of achieving something that looks like this. And there's a diagram in the book which I won't go through in detail here, but again, the essence of the book is to differentiate this regenerative paradigm, which exists in the paradigm of holism, the living systems paradigm of holism, in contrast with the materialist mechanistic paradigm of reductionism. And you can see as you go from the bottom toward the top, you'll recognize most of the developments we've been working on over the past 25 years, and in many cases, in some cases, 50 years, to try to, quote, fix the economy and make it less bad. But all of them are, in my opinion, trapped in this materialist mechanistic paradigm,
Mhm.
including all of the well-meaning good work that I'm, very much a part of. And it's not that these things are wrong or bad, it's that they preclude the possibility of potential and therefore the possibility of thriving and the possibility of continuing. Because if all we have to manage is what we currently know about and can see and can measure in our metrics, our reductionist thinking, then I find the prospects for the human project pretty grim. But we know from living systems that they emerge and evolve to manifest potential that's unseen in advance. Um, this is not a new idea. William Blake understood that the reductionist logic of Newton was very limited. He made fun of Newton with this painting.
Hold on, we need to
He
mute.
made fun of Newton with this painting, which is meant to symbolize, humans' arrogant belief that we can measure what matters. That instrument is a compass, where this character is measuring what matters and missing basically everything that really matters. And then the final visual I'll just share, and this is very crude, but to get to, Samantha, your point on where this bioregional movement fits within this. Oh, and by the way, I didn't highlight. You'll see up in the top there, resilient business ecosystems and bioregionalism to me are the response to the necessary response to the regenerative paradigm, as opposed to um, uh, ever more reductionist metrics within the existing paradigm of materialism. So, and that's in the book. That's not something that I just made up for this call. Um, but finally, this last picture, it's maybe a way to think about the global economy as an organism. And the idea is that, we need to do the stuff differently at the bottom. And if we do the stuff intelligently and in line with how life works at the bottom, there's this immense untapped potential up at the top for the human project to focus on the things that ultimately give us both dignity and well-being. And I don't know if that's helpful. If anyone has ideas on how to better visualize this, please don't be shy. But that's sort of the point. But again, to reiterate, I see bioregionalism as the cellular level of the organism's health, and no organism can be healthy at the
Mm,
macro level if it's not healthy at the cellular level. But that doesn't mean that healing bioregions is the magic bullet, right? It's the foundational piece as opposed to the whole thing. Um,
beautiful. Thank you, John. Some really cool visuals there. And yeah, I've been sitting with that chart that you showed where we move from the extractive to the mitigation paradigm to truly moving into a regenerative economy, a regenerative way of seeing our role as humans on the earth. And yeah, the ideas that you're bringing forward in this book, for me, it's not like an if we implement them, but just a matter of when.
mm.
And Tyler and I are in the Amazon right now, and I've been down here a couple of weeks, and it's very clear we've already lost more than 20% of the forest, and the scientists say once we lose 20%, you start to reach a tipping point where it turns into savanna. And so the need for regeneration of so many different bioregions, but also of our economies is urgent, and it's like now's the time. And I'm optimistic that as it becomes more clear that our old political systems, financial systems, economic systems, healthcare systems are collapsing, that people will have more ease with transitioning to something that is quite different than what they've been operating in. Which brings me to my next question for you, John. So there's this deepening field of regenerative economics that you've been pioneering for quite some time now, and I think more and more people are coming to see the clarity in your vision and what you laid out in your initial paper, and you're of course advancing it in this new book. And then there's this like resurging bioregional movement that's happening, and much more focus in that movement on the economics and finance of how do we engage in place-based transitions to regenerative ways of sustaining ourselves that are within the ecological boundaries of the places where we live. And at the core of regenerative economics and at the core of bioregionalism is a consciousness shift, right? It's
Mm.
a shift to a different way of seeing the world. And Tyler and I, in our Schumacher lecture that we gave last year, were talking about how bioregionalism we see as a sort of ontological, epistemological, and ethical U-turn that is chosen by people that are deeply embedded in modernity, but see that we're on a dead-end trajectory and are
Mm.
choosing a path of aligning with living systems principles again. And I guess I'm wondering if you could speak to how you hope the ideas in this book can kind of meet the bioregional movement and support that kind of mindset shift that is needed to then like get engaged in place-based work that is truly transformational.
Hang on 1 second. I just have to, my wife's calling. I just make sure it's not an emergency.
Okay. Okay, sure.
No, she's okay.
Okay.
I've got a 96-year-old mom that's struggling. So,
Mhm.
um, and I was a bit distracted, but I think the gist of last question was how, say the last piece again, because
Yeah,
that's
I
where I
think
got
my
interrupted.
core question is how the ideas in your regenerative economics book, as we're like entering into
Yeah,
a deepening phase in this work, and the bioregional movement resurging, how do those ideas braid together, and how do those movements become more powerful together? And what is the role of internal transformation needed for us
right,
all to show up
right.
to the work in a good way?
Well, first, just on the the logic of this change is going to happen. It's a question of when. That is validated by the science, which is that systems only change in response to pressure. So, if we get ourselves depressed about the pace, but understand that the pressure is increasing, therefore the pace will increase as well by default, by physics. And with respect to the inner transformation consciousness shift, I have zero doubt that that is ultimately what's driving this. And I have no idea. Well, I have a little bit of an idea, but it's one of the real mysteries as to how do we awaken enough people. Because there's a lot of good people who, I mean, I sort of live in two worlds. I still have friends and connections in the world I came out of, and then I have friends and conversations like this one, and there's lots of good people in my old world who just don't see this, and it's changing, but it's very, very slow, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but what I feel very strongly is that the idea of convincing someone that this is the pathway forward is a dead end. That they have to come to it in one way or another. And I think one of our collective challenges is how do we accelerate that process? I can't remember if we did this, Samantha, when you went through the course, but in our economics course, my friend Sandy Wiggins does 3 sessions of breath work. And that's just meant to be an invitation into the consciousness shifting dimension of regenerative economics. Um, and that aspect of it, I find is increasingly the whole point. Like the rest of it is almost the details, because if we get the consciousness shift, the rest of it becomes sort of self-fulfilling, self-evident. How could we ever have thought anything different? I use the analogy, it's like, someday we'll realize that destroying the dignity of other humans or destroying the dignity of life of the Amazon is no different than biting off our own hand, you know. But until we see these things as interconnected, genuinely interconnected, and our collective well-being dependent on that, it's not a rational. It's you can't win that argument rationally. So I guess I I guess what I would say is that I mean, everyone doing this work in place is struggling because it's really hard, right? Um, I remember talking to Spencer Beebe about your book, Samantha, and he said, "Yeah, but do they realize how hard this is?" You know,
The answer
I
was
mean,
no, not at the time.
guy's been doing this for 30 years,
Yeah.
and just the people part, getting people to genuinely work, play in the sandbox together, and people that don't normally play together and know each other and across cultures and across nation states, is really hard. And what I hope is that the economics framework will help people see that there just is a massive need to recycle the financial surplus that our economy has generated back into the initially just a simple restoration of the bioregional of bioregional health, both life and human life and non-human life.
Mhm.
That's $1 trillion enterprise, if we had any wisdom. And this is where, the vision of bioregional financing facilities is so critical. In a sense, it's the investment banks of bioregional restoration. What investment banks do is they marry buyers and sellers of stuff, and they connect, sources of capital with uses of capital. And I don't know how to convince sovereign wealth funds and billionaires and whatnot that the flow of philanthropy is trivial relative to what it needs to be. And I don't know how to convince philanthropists that their 3-year projects where you deliver metrics to prove that it worked is just so out of line with the scale of what's required. But
Mhm.
that's actually the third book I've got in my head is it'll be called something like The Capital Cycle.
Mhm.
And it's a revolution in the way we think about philanthropy. Because right now, as you all know, philanthropy is sort of like, nibbling. First of all, the United States has a lot of problems, but one of the good things is we actually have the largest share of philanthropy by, relative to wealth than other countries. Now we have trivial government services as well,
Mhm.
um, the philanthropic model is still based on Carnegie's Gospel of Wealth. And if you want a real laugh, go read The Gospel of Wealth by Andrew Carnegie, where he
Mhm.
essentially, he says a lot of good things like people shouldn't die rich, they should give their money away. But then he says, but the problem is solved because those of us that are rich are by definition the smart ones. And so it's up to us to figure out how to solve these problems. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Mhm.
So, at any rate, those are my thoughts on that.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I've been playing with sharing in some presentations I've been giving the question, how do we invest our money while it's still worth something? And the window in which we can do something with our money to protect our ecosystems and to protect the ecosystem services that humans and the economy depend on is rapidly closing. I'm curious if you're seeing more of the wealth holders or investors that you speak to realize how tight that window is getting.
Um, it's so clouded by the chaos, the day-to-day chaos. It feels like people are more afraid about losing their money in the old-fashioned sense for the old-fashioned reasons than they're worried about. I mean, and again, I'm biased by living in the United States, but the sustainability conversation has gone silent, and the how do we protect democracy conversation is dominant. I
Mm,
was in a I was in a gathering in a house in the village I live in. It's an 18th century, 18th and 19th century little village, and we were sitting around a living room like, the olden days. And ironically, the guy's house, the guy who owns the house happened to own a Civil War era rifle that was sitting above the fireplace. And we're literally talking, the ACLU was there presenting facts on the 7 steps to authoritarianism, and we're at step 6. So when you're living in that context, there's no room for a
mm,
conversation about what's happening in to the
mm,
Amazon, I'm afraid. So it's a disaster. And one of the things the ACLU guys said is that don't think this is, going to get solved in the next midterm election, much less the next national election. We're in a 10-year fight.
mm,
So that kind of goes back to my opening comment. I think we're way deeper in this muck than even those of us on this call who are very conscious of it have fully processed because it's so hard to process. I
Mm.
mean, just this Epstein thing alone, I think we've seen 10% of what we're going to see.
Mm.
Like, did they release the worst stuff first or leave the worst stuff for later?
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
It's going to be unbelievable. Um,
Yeah,
and,
it's
and yet
almost
we need to keep doing the work on the ground, you know?
yeah, it's overwhelming how everything feels like it's kind of falling apart all at once, but I think that's a good transition to yeah, like a core question that I have for you. There is so much beautiful work of people coming together in their places to protect the bioculture that is there, to restore bioculture where it's been lost. And here I'm talking about human culture and biodiversity braiding together. And I never lose hope because in the work that Tyler and I and our team have been doing, there's just so much innovation and humility and generosity and real like creation of resilience at the local level that we're witnessing is being created. And I wonder if you want to share a reflection about how you see the bottom work up of envisioning economic transformation, organizing portfolios of projects that support that economic transformation, and the financing of those projects can meet this moment of top-down collapse and meta crisis
Yeah.
that we're in.
We had a, excuse me, a fascinating, excuse me, we had a fascinating conversation just yesterday in my investment course with a guy named Cordell Jacks, who's another course alum I think you know,
I'm
Samantha, right?
talking to him later
Yeah.
today.
Oh, good. So the global economy is so complex and dense that you can't just sort of say the economy and have it mean anything. One of the things that we need to remember, and this will get to your question in a second. One of the things that will surprise all of us is that even in the United States, half the global economy in terms of revenues and certainly, and more than that, in terms of employees, is made up of small and mid-sized businesses. And small, I forget the definition, but under 50 people employed, maybe under 500 people, but some, relatively small organizations, revenues, think of it, in the single digit millions category. And many of them place-based. I'm talking about a business like the local electrician who's now built a business of, 5 trucks that service a community. And there are just thousands of these businesses. And there's this thing we refer to as the silver tsunami, which is that many of these businesses are still run by the founders. The founders are getting to be retirement age, and quite often their kids have no interest in these businesses. And but they're viable, resilient cash flow businesses that are built on local relationships. And and then, by the way, there's another. If you add the big businesses that are family owned or family controlled, which is an entirely different animal than a public company, you get up to 70% of the global economy. And these numbers are probably higher outside the United States in developed economies, so-called developed economies, and even higher in the so-called underdeveloped economies. In other words, in the underdeveloped economies, the proportion that are small, mid-sized enterprises and or family owned and controlled is I don't know what it is. It's got to be north of 80%. And so there's an opportunity to essentially regenerate, repurpose when these businesses go through this generational transition, the kind of the core engine of the global economy to be reconnected and realigned with place. And so one of the and I don't, this is really hard. Like in each place, each business is hard. But a business like the one I'm describing is much more likely to get and be interested in the bioregional health, the work of the projects that we're all talking about doing, than some distant global corporation with, public shareholders and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I think one of the key challenges, in addition to shifting our whole worldview on what philanthropy really is about, that it's not giving away charity, it's actually the capital cycle. It's what life needs to happen. But we also need to tie in this bioregional work with these small, mid-sized businesses that already exist, as opposed to thinking we have to start all these businesses, which is really, really hard.
Mhm.
And so um, that's an opportunity that, I would say over the next 10, 20 years, if we're wise, we will consider small, mid-sized enterprises that exist with existing resilient cash flows as the flywheel to help drive this bioregional regeneration. And the opportunity is that it's not that we have to convince, let's be honest, the 70-year-old guy who's just trying to, sell his business for his retirement. It's
Mhm.
going to be a next generation of entrepreneur who is much more likely to have the consciousness that we're describing that's going to step in and
Mhm.
transition these businesses. And so it's actually super exciting. And one last comment on this that we learned yesterday is that someone asked, um, how are you finding investors to do this? And this is a much longer conversation, but the punchline is Cordell said, we're finding it easier to sell this idea to just traditional investors than to impact investors.
Mhm.
Because the whole point is he's doing this in a regenerative way. He's saying we're going to create the conditions around these companies to manifest potential, to manifest regenerative potential. We're not going to tell them what to do. We're not going to and he gave an example of a air compressor company that they bought. And rather than set the metrics on how to make the air compressor business more circular and blah, 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 and, you know, impact on, living wage and this, that, and the other thing, which are all good things. He said, we actually just invited all of the stakeholders of the business to help reimagine the business. And it turns out that they, for some reason, have received tons of RFPs to do water filtration. And it's an engineering group, and they're like, "Hey, we know how to do that." And so they started responding to some of these RFPs. And to get to the punchline, they've now essentially redesigned the entire company around water filtration, which never would have been on the impact metrics that an impact investor would have had and tried to imply or impose on the company in the first place. So to me, it's an example of the opportunities for regenerative potential are laying everywhere. In this case, they were in a mid-level employee who's been receiving these RFPs and have been told, don't respond, don't waste your time on that. We're not in that business.
Mhm.
Um, and so I just use that as an example of, the need to shift out of this reductionist, metrics-driven paradigm into this create conditions and manifest potential way of thinking.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
interestingly, the traditional investors, they weren't trying to insist on any metrics for impact. They just
Mhm.
wanted good investments. And so it's interesting. It's again, I'm not trashing impact investing, but impact investing has been trapped in the reductionist metrics approach, just like so much else of the quote new economy.
I appreciate that, John. Yeah, I've been really inspired to follow Cordell's work on this, and I hear you saying that when we shift our way of seeing, that we see opportunities for regenerative potential everywhere.
Exactly. Exactly. Which, by the way, I learned from the people at the Savory Institute. You see
Yeah, I see Jason, the CEO
yeah,
of
Jason's
Savory on the
here.
call
Yeah.
here. Hi, Jason.
But like the degraded landscapes are filled with potential that no one saw until this crazy guy from Zimbabwe uh, sort of tried to sort of mimic how the wild animals move with domesticated cattle.
Hmm.
Um, so our challenge is to see is not to just go do that with grasslands, but to imagine what all the possibilities are in the more traditional economy.
Yeah,
Uh,
what to do with this degraded soil of a world that we've inherited.
yeah, and I guess my point here is don't assume we need to build these projects from the ground up.
Mm,
Because there's a huge, from a business point of view, there's a huge value in a going concern with existing customers and existing cash flow to start with that and transform that as opposed to starting with a blank sheet of paper and a PowerPoint and go beg for money.
mhm. Thank you, John. I want us to have some time for Q&A, and Tyler's going to help us facilitate that. Maybe we stack a few questions together, and if there are a bunch of them, we invite folks to please raise your hands. I see Alex already has his hand up, and we'll call on you, and we might kind of stack some questions together for John so we can get them all in if we get a long queue.
Yeah, and one last thought just on the key ideas in the book that I just want to raise because it ties directly to all of your work. You all know more about the commons than I do, I'm sure, but I was particularly inspired by Peter Barnes's work about the institution or the sector of the commons, uh, complementing the work of David Bollier and Eleanor Ostrom about the practice of commoning.
Mhm.
And one of the things about a regenerative system is that it's self-organizing and self-fueling, to use Jane Jacobs' term. And I've been wrestling for years with, how the hell are we going to make that possible? And Peter's work really offers the answer. And if you go back to kind of the global architecture of our current macroeconomic system, it was largely designed in the wake of World War II, and a bunch of guys met in New Hampshire and designed the system. And there's been some changes since then, but basically it hasn't changed. And yet the context now is entirely different. And the exciting opportunity of thinking about the commons as a institution or as a sector comparable to the private sector and comparable to the public sector, but distinct from the public sector, is that it offers us a way to embed the economy in the bigger source of abundance that actually exists. And I'm talking about not just the natural commons, but also the technological commons, the human, the total collective human technological progress in all forms, culture, not just technology. And as you all know, we allow the private sector to extract from that at no cost.
Mhm.
But if we apply the model of, say, a fishery or a forest that's managed intelligently to all of the abundance of both living commons and technological commons, we have the source of, we essentially bring the abundance back into the economic system that's been
Mm.
left outside of it. And I calculated in the book that we're managing the global economy. We're only managing, it's a rough calculation, but 13% of total wealth. Even if you ignore the intrinsic and sacred wealth of life, just using ecosystem services kind of calculations, we're ignoring, 75, 80%, 85% of the true abundance. And we're trying to manage with the number I came up with is 13% of it. So the radical rethinking of embedding the commons in what we call the economy and charging for its use and ensuring that we govern it for the health of the long term would dramatically reduce the creation of billionaires because it wouldn't be so profitable if you couldn't just extract from these commons. And it would create a massive source of shared well-being. It's as if everyone could be a trust fund kid, which is really the reality that we're born into on this planet. but
Mm.
we've designed it so that only a few people get the benefit of it.
Mm.
So
Thank you for
anyway,
that, John.
Thanks, John. Encourage folks to keep putting questions in the chat. I'm going to go over to Alex because he was quick with the hand. And then as more questions come through in the chat, after Alex asks and John responds, I'll try to maybe do a bit of a synthesis of what I'm seeing and just give John the last couple minutes to close this out. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks so much. And thank you, John, for a
hey,
wonderful
Alex.
talk. Really great to hear from you. I am curious, one of the intersection between regenerative economics on one side and bioregional finance on the other seems to me to have to do with many things, but one of them would be extraction and the idea of what non-extractive finance, non-extractive investments might look like. And obviously, on one side of the spectrum, you can think about philanthropy or even concessionary capital. There's a lot of conversations going on about impact investing right now. But it feels like for somebody who's been involved in the finance industry, I know a lot of people in the finance industry think about the world in terms of risk, and they calculate what equity and what equitable relations are around risk and reward. So I'm just curious if you can just if you have dive down into the questions about what non-extractive investments actually look like, what their characteristics are, or maybe some of the leading thinkers that are trying to practice that. When the people that are really trying to grapple with what it means to take risk and think about timescales and then make investments that would still be considered non-extractive.
Hmm. That's a huge question. I have to start with, so whew. So one of the problems, there's so many problems with, forget about the bad behavior in finance for a second. Let's assume everyone's a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout. Um, the underlying premise, this goes back to the logic of the machine. The Newtonian premise in finance is organized around internal rates of return. And internal rates of return, net present value, however you want to think about it, presume that time is reversible. They presume that there's no path dependency in what we do. And that's just simply wrong. If we if we stop building electric cars and go back to building gas guzzlers, it changes the outcome of, and you can't ever go back and 10 years later say, oh, well, now we'll do electric cars. Well, no, we've just locked in a big problem. Um, and of course, the the time value of money minimizes future costs, discounts them back. So, and then we call that a market failure. Well, it's not a market failure, it's an intellectual failure. And so those of us that have been wrestling with how to do, impact investing or non-extractive investing, it's almost impossible to do it within the framework of finance. I don't know what a good analogy would be, but in the book, I talk about the finance algorithm. And what I mean by that is it's the algorithm. So it's the immune system of the economy. But an immune system, and Jude Currivan, by the way, is the one that gave me this idea, planted this seed. An immune system is actually what keeps a system in its current form. If the current form is healthy, the immune system keeps the organism healthy. But we have an economy that's an organism that's unhealthy. And I see the finance algorithm, including shareholder value ideas, optimizing this, that, and the other thing, net present value IR, as trapping the economic system in that unhealthy state. And so, yes, there are examples of people doing non-extractive investments. So, for example, putting a cap on making an equity investment that's capped. So the company has the right to buy back the investment, at a whatever the fair, appropriate return is for the risk, as you say, but not unlimited upside. That would be a very tangible, practical thing you could do. But we're putting band-aids on a lesion or a, whatever it's the whole thing has to be rethought in a much more fundamental way. Um, so
Thanks,
sorry, I
John.
can't give a concise answer.
Oh, good. I think that was great. I'm gonna try to bring two or three questions that I'm seeing into one. So one of the questions I see in the chat, speaking of algorithm, is kind of asking you, do you see any path forward for transforming the way the immune system works, transforming the way we do finance without putting a value on ecosystem services or some sort of value on
Uh,
technology? And then complementing that is this question of um, what is the role of embedding these ideas into the machine, into the advancing AI tech, given that we're headed towards an AI world? What is the role of influencing the logic of those machines, and does that relate to valuing ecosystem services?
yeah.
Apologies, friends, if I didn't capture the essence of those questions well, but
Yeah, no,
rolling
I
out.
think you did. I'm sure you did. So those are again two huge. I'm struggling to come up with something concise to respond. So on the ecosystem services piece, this is the love it, hate it conversation. In fact, I'm doing my own discovery dialogue on this exact question the end of this month with an expert on it. But you know, two things can be true. Um, Putting a price on ecosystem services that are currently priced at zero has to be better than leaving the price at zero. And the other thing that is true is that if we reductionism, reduce life to ecosystem services, um, we're doomed in the long run. So I would say in the short run, if we know what we're doing, it's a good band-aid to facilitate the flow of capital into things we know we need to do. The danger is we think we've, brilliantly embedded ecosystem services into our market-based economy and have solved the problem. Peter Brown, who was one of my real early and important teachers, he used to say, or he liked to say, there's a difference between a cost that can be fixed with money and a wrong that can never be fixed. And if you think about that, it's actually very profound. So, yes, we can embed in the price of, soccer tickets, the cost to clean up the community after the soccer game because people throw their beer cups around. But no, we can't actually put a price on carbon to quote fix climate change. Um, so I guess my view would be we should use it as a band-aid tool and be very careful about how we use it and know that it's a band-aid and not a solution. On the AI thing, I encourage everyone to check out two people's work in particular, both course alums. Jessica Grootman has launched something called the Regenerative Technology Project. And I've been working a lot with Grant Story, who's got an AI company. There's actually a AI companion to my book that we're still fiddling with. But my view is we can't stick our head in the sand. We've got to engage with this, even though I'd rather stick my head in the sand and wish it go away. But the core idea is that the AI models are populated with reductionist thinking, and therefore they're going to accelerate all of the problems that come from reductionist thinking. And so we need to actually begin to populate AI models with holistic thinking in order to get the benefit of the technology without the harm. And obviously, in the face of the trillions, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in this technology, this is you know, it's almost laughable. But uh, you know, it's just one more thing where we can't sort of give up and throw our hands up. And I guess I'm both terrified of AI and hopeful that, you know, all these knuckleheads that are racing for AI dominance will turn out to be not as smart as people think they are, and there'll be a crash. There's no question in my mind there's going to be a crash. The amount of investment that's gone into this compared to anything I've ever heard of in my lifetime is absurd. And these people are psychopaths, like legitimate psychopaths. And so chances are something is not going to work out the way
Mm,
they think it is.
mm,
And so our job is to build underneath, think the hard, difficult thoughts that need to be thought as to how to use this technology in a constructive way, and then get out of the way when the crash happens.
mm.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for being on camera and showing your lovely faces. Samantha put some links in the chat just relevant to the BioFi community of practice, the high-low group where you can connect with others, the calendar of upcoming events, including another deep dive coming up March 24th with Alexander Sterling.
Who's on the call? Hi,
Yeah.
Alexander.
So we're excited for that. And just want to say another big thanks to you, John, for showing up today despite the cold and all the relationships you're tending and caring for. And thanks for all the
My
work.
pleasure. Great to be with you all. Thank you all for all the good work I know you're doing, and I know how hard it is, having participated in it myself here in what used to be known as Pequot Nation. So
More to come. And I also dropped a link to John's Discovery Dialogue series in the chat. So, folks, if you're not already signed up to John's mailing list there, he hosts some amazing conversations, and all the recordings are on that page as well. And yeah, I just really want to honor you, John, for the trail that you've been blazing for a long time, that so many of us are walking on. And we are so benefiting from your work, and thank you for keeping at it. And let's go on together.
well, likewise, what's most encouraging to me is seeing all the great work that's happening in the world, and it's sort of funny as you get into your 60s, you realize that you're not going to do the work, you're gonna inspire the work. So I'm increasingly feeling that way and limited in my own capacity. So anyway, thank you, and also, for those that are interested in the economic issues and how it applies to business, we have an overlapping community between this community and what we call the With Life community. So check it out. Withlife.net is a free community with lots of stuff happening every week, including all of our courses, but also conversations. And we I think of this community and that community as one community. So the more it weaves together, the better.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Feel free to come off mute and say goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for sharing.
Long.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
So
Thanks,
much.
John.
It's
See
amazing.
everyone soon.
Thank you.
Buy the book.